Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is an extraordinary general meeting of the Council. We are here to consider one item only, and with all extraordinary general meetings, we dispense with the majority of the usual items that appear on Council agendas, so there is no questions from members of the public and so on. So we move straight on. Do we have apologies for absence?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Apologies have been received from Councillors Brian Adams, Martin Lear, Kika Miralles, Sam Pritchard, Stephen Reynolds, Simon Thornton and Bob Upton.
Thank you very much. Do we have declarations of interest?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Mike Band has declared a non-pecuniary interest as a One-Ursh Parish Councillor and Waverley's representative on the Surrey Hills AONB board. Both organisations have submitted comments on the local plan documents.
Thank you very much. We move on then to the substantive item. Minutes of the executive for relating to the local plan. This is the executive which was held this afternoon. Leader, would you like to come and present this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to present the minutes of the executive which was held earlier this evening, and I believe I have a seconder.
Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to second.
Thank you. I'm pleased to bring before you this evening the minutes of the executive. The executive was heard earlier this evening, and the item considered and before you this evening is the Waverley Borough Local Plan Part 1, and that Part 1 is to submit the plan before the inspector. The executive, as you will see, considered the report in great detail, and a number of comments were made. As members, you will have before you several updated documents, which follows feedback from you and also builds on the feedback from the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee from last week, which again debated in great detail this particular item before you. Given the significance of this to the entire borough and our important towns and parishes, I'd like to again take this opportunity to thank all the officers involved. It's been an extremely lengthy process, ensuring that we bring before you an evidence-based local plan which will really put us back in control and give us the opportunity to actually drive and plan for our borough, for our residents, for the future. Colleagues, there are two recommendations before you, and I would invite anyone who would like to speak.
Thank you, Leader. Ladies and gentlemen, are there anybody who wishes to make a comment? Oh, that was a quick meeting. Good. Mr. Ramsdale, Councillor Ramsdale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On balance, I find that the local plan is close to being the best that we can achieve in the circumstances. We have been placed in And I don't want to do anything that will slow up the progress to get it to the next stage. I think we all understand that what we need to do is to get a local plan in place soon. However, I'm disappointed that an area in the south of Farnham, which was identified in the Green Belt Review as suitable and has been the subject of many observations in the consultation that it should be turned to Green Belt, that's not been done with this opportunity. I'd like to state that if a future opportunity arises such that the area around Dockenfield and Frensham can be made a part of the Green Belt, then I, for one, would be in support of such a change, as I think that area is very important as a green lung for the people of Farnham to escape to or move to when they need to ride a bike or take a walk. Now, I understand that the Green Belt will be looked at again in part 2, so I wondered if the members of the executive from their meeting could give me any confidence that the area I've just been describing, that's the area south of Farnham, will be looked at in that work. Having expressed that reservation, I remain committed to do my part to making this move forward, but if we can do something about that green lung to the south of Farnham, it would be great going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ramsdale. Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is clear to me that we need to submit a local plan as soon as possible, certainly this calendar year, to ensure that we can control our destiny rather than being told, for example, that our numbers are going to be a different number and other things like that. I'm satisfied that we have the evidence that this is the best that can be achieved, and would reiterate the enormous amount of hard work that the officers have put in, and with the tons of paper that I seem to have got as a result. Having lived in the Shalford side of Wannish for over 25 years, I have to say that there's an element of scepticism on the advice we've had on transport. The reality on the ground seems to me that don't seem to match the report totally, particularly when in the rush hour in the morning, quite often the queue from Wannish to Shalford can reach nearly a mile to get past the Shalford roundabout. But I note that the transport issues are still subject to further advice, and I'm comforted by the fact that the recommendation makes it clear that the head of planning services, in consultation with the leader or the planning portfolio holder, be authorised to make any necessary changes to the schedule of modification arising from the updating of the supporting evidence, with particular with regard to the infrastructure delivery schedule. Because it seems to me that the problems, particularly on the 281 and the main road from Cranley to Shalford, can only be ameliorated if all the scheduled recommendations are carried out, plus I suspect a few more. And I note that the infrastructure delivery schedule has lots of things that are going to be done by 2032, particularly by in connection with any planning permission, if granted, in respect of Dunsfold, and quite considerable works. I mean, works to the roundabout at Shalford, works to Station Road Junction in Bramley, and a lot of other things. Unless all those things are done, because that's what we're advised needs to be done, the 281 is going to be even more catastrophic than it is now. But with the comfort that amendments may arise as a result of further advice we get between now and the inspection, I'm happy to support the local plan. We'll vote for it. You know, I share still quite a lot of scepticism about the advice we've had on transport. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When this plan in its form then was first put forward, I stood in this chamber and said my feeling was that Cranley was being dumped on. And I have to say there's nothing in this plan, in the stages that it's gone through, that has caused me to change my mind. The impact on Cranley by us not having a plan in place, however, has been quite disastrous. And in those circumstances, I had to look and take an unbalanced view. And on balance, I suppose I have to admit that I find it acceptable, but it's not a plan that I can really enthuse about because of the impact on Cranley. As you've gathered, I represent Cranley, and I'm indeed very sorry that Cranley will bear, to my mind, a disproportionate burden of housing and appalling traffic conditions and infrastructure problems that have to be dealt before these properties can go ahead. However, I have to bear in mind that not only do I represent Cranley, I have to consider the wider impact on the borough. And in the circumstances, I feel that with great sadness, I shall have to support this plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I strongly support the local plan going forward to inspection. This is part of a process. It has many stages, and I entirely agree with Councillor Goodrich's comments that we need to keep moving forward. I actually place a lot of reliance on the examination in public as a particularly important stage in making sure this plan is sound. That is, after all, what it's there for. And I think we, for reasons which are no one's fault, face more challenges than many. I think it is foreseeable that at the examination in public, which may well take a considerable time, we will be asked to make changes to enable the inspector to be content with the plan. I also endorse in this respect the comments that Councillor Goodrich made about the transport evidence. I have worked particularly closely on this, and I entirely share his scepticism. As a minor example, if you read the Dunsfold Aerodrome transport assessment, the assertion is made that the average weekday 8 a.m. travel time from Alfold Road to Shalford, 7 miles, and Alfold Road is important because that's where Dunsfold will have its new exit, it takes 13 minutes, which to any local resident is a matter of some surprise. In fact, you can look at Google Maps from the comfort of your bed and see what time it is forecasting for that journey. And for the past fortnight, it's been between 16 and 24 minutes. And indeed, this morning it said 23 minutes when I was actually parked ready to do the journey myself, and it actually took 31 minutes. So I think Councillor Goodrich's comments are entirely correct, and we need to see a very rigorous and vigorous examination of the evidence by both sides in front of the inspector, so that we can be confident that in this very difficult matter, the best possible answer has been reached. And so I merely add to my support for the plan the hope that we will prepare as thoroughly as we can to give the best possible account of how we have arrived at our proposals, and to hope that the inevitable objections from both sides will lead to a very solid answer. I think there are residents in the southeast who are not going to be happy with the outcome, almost no matter what. But I do think they're reasonable enough to feel that if we have done everything we can to reach the most solid possible answer, they will be far more content than if they think we have in any way rushed it or tried to get things through without giving them proper consideration. And that brings me to the other point. We have, of course, in recent weeks heard about the report from Neil McGregor suggesting that our OAN, objectively assessed need, may be higher than it should be. I hope very much this council will avoid the embarrassment of being asked by the inspector to go away and do another SHMA or OAN calculation during the examination in public. We'll make use of the period between now and the examination to get that work done, so we are prepared at least should that happen to become a relevant factor. So subject to those two points, transport and the OAN, I support this and will be happy to vote for it.
Thank you, Councillor Mulliner. I do not have any other person. Oh, Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just making sure it's clear, I would declare that I'm a member of Dunsfold Parish Council who have submitted points on the local plan. I fully support the need for having housing and having a plan, except for I am very concerned about three aspects of the plan we're submitting. One is the distribution of housing, especially that for affordable, in relationship for need. I still don't think that we have got a clear picture of where the houses are really needed and how it's going to work in practice. I'm concerned about the traffic sustainability, especially around the area of Cranley and Dunsfold Park, and the fact that we're still awaiting for a final report from Surrey County Council. I'm concerned, like other councillors, about the infrastructure plan. There's so many sums still to be confirmed. There's so many funding gaps that are showing up. I see we're using SIL to basically prop up some of the issues that are there. I'm concerned that the rural villages are not really being supported, especially those in and around the new Dunsfold Park proposal. And I'm very concerned for the impact on the local roads, the small B roads and minor roads that are impacted in the east of the borough. For the reasons of these concerns and that of our local residents, I'm not able to support this plan, but I will not vote against it.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Councillor Hyman is next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do agree with Councillor Goodridge's and others' scepticism in respect of the transport proposals that are here and that aren't yet here. I also share their concerns in respect of OAN and the SHMA. I'm not going to propose an amendment in respect of perhaps reviewing the SHMA and the numbers and distribution of housing, because I have a feeling that it would be voted down were I to do so, and that would be a waste of everybody's time. But I would say that I, and probably others, would support such a motion if someone else were to recommend it or put it forward to you. There are, however, other problems which I wasn't able to address fully at the joint ONS, partly because I was the chairman, and obviously it wasn't my position to be doing that. But there are a couple of problems, and we could sort them here, because I don't think anyone here wants this to fail tonight. I don't think anyone wants to add to the time that it will take to get this through submission and adoption. We need a local plan in place, but we've failed twice already. We can't afford to fail for a third time. We are repeating yet again the mistake, certainly of the first time, where the inspector, Mr. John Mattox, in 2006 stated in his supplementary question on AAN mitigation, which killed it off at the post-submission but pre-inquiry stage. He said, "How can I be certain that the mitigation measures will be effective in the terms of the Wadensey judgment?" Paragraph 13 of 2006 refers, and that remains, of course. The sustainability appraisal and HRA are deficient. We know they are because we haven't had the Natural England report. We know that the law tells us that we can only authorise a plan or project if a competent authority has made certain that the plan or project will not adversely affect the integrity of the site. I'm quoting. It says, "That is the case where no reasonable scientific doubt remains as to the absence of such effects, and without Natural England's evidence, no one in this room can be certain." And in fact, we don't have authority to make the decision unless we tidy this up just a tiny bit, because Regulation 9.5 of the Habitats Regulations requires that we have respect for the directive, as we don't have that evidence and we don't have the bird numbers in the AA, appropriate assessment. It's not an appropriate assessment, and we cannot lawfully make this decision that we're being asked to tonight unless we tighten it up just a tiny bit. Furthermore, I would agree, the SEA is obviously deficient in respect of air quality in Farnham, if not elsewhere. At ONS it was confirmed the local plan here is based on the assumption that East Street's constructed along with Crest's new road system, which still hasn't been modelled and assessed, so the SEA cannot be complete. And that's fairly obvious, and the leader said that this will be done later. We need to force the authorities that are responsible for this, Surrey Highways and Natural England, to step up to the plate, and the only way to do that is to add a little phasing. I've got a recommendation in that respect. If I can just quote from page 5 of the Chapter 8 Infrastructure and Community Services, it says the Council will work with all infrastructure providers to ensure that where necessary developments are phased to provide time for infrastructure to be provided. So I'm just adding to that, if I may, I have a minor alteration which will satisfy myself that tonight's decision is lawful, and I can vote for it happily in all good conscience. And I have the wording here, which is to add to the alteration that was made earlier. Can I put this up as my recommendation, my amendment, a minor amendment?
Are you intending to propose an amendment to one of the recommendations?
A minor amendment to recommendation 2, if I may, Mr. Mayor. And it's, if I can just simply give you the words first, it's to add to the end, including phasing necessary to ensure compliance with the Habitats Directive and Circular 06/2005 and with air quality legislation. And it's that simple to satisfy me that tonight's decision is lawful.
Thank you for that.
I think I have a seconder.
Councillor Williamson seconding.
Yes, I'm happy to second it.
Would anybody wish to speak to that amendment? Do we need it read out? Oh, thank you. I can't see that. Does anybody wish to speak to that amendment? Oh, thank you. I've got it in front of me now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Given the history surrounding various interpretations of our compliance with the Habitats Directive, I wonder how in practice this would work to satisfy the proposer of this amendment that it could ever be compliant, considering that it has often been deemed unlawful.
Anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Hyman, do you wish to reply?
Thank you, if I may, Mr. Mayor. In response to that point, it's quite clear we don't have the evidence. I have read the elements from the law, which quite clearly states that we have to have the evidence or we cannot make the decision. I have to trust that the portfolio holder and head of planning will take this forward, and obviously if it isn't taken forward properly, then the local plan will either fail its examination as the first one did, or it will be fought. But in order to make sure that we can support tonight's recommendation, because we don't want to extend this any further, obviously it makes sense not to put forward a recommendation that anybody could argue with. They're simply stating that it must be compliant. It covers the arguments. Regulation 9.5 of the Habitats Regulations requires that the Habitats Directive is taken into account in the conduct of our functions. We have a minor problem with NE11. Officers certainly know what I'm referring to there, where it does not refer to the in-combination impacts, and it should. I'll trust officers to add that in, but I don't want to complicate this motion, because there's no reason at all why anybody would not vote for it, and it certainly tightens our position so that we are tonight's decision satisfies the terms of the Habitats Regulations and the directive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Leader, you have the opportunity to comment.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. Councillor Hyman, in response to the comments that you're raising, and I know that this is an area of concern for you, but just to be absolutely clear here, Natural England have not objected to our plan. they've not objected, and they've been very clear that they have no objection subject to suitable mitigation. And we are absolutely clear and satisfied that in these terms, our plan is sound and can absolutely be evidence-based when it comes before an inspector. So I'm not quite sure what you expect to achieve by this amendment, but as far as we are concerned, this is a sound, evidence-based plan, and Natural England have not objected. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Can we take a vote, please, on the amendment? You have it in front of you. Would those in favour of the amendment please show?
May we ask for a recorded vote on this, please, Chairman?
You may indeed, if you have 5 supporters. 1, 2, 3, 4 supporters. We can record your votes in favour, but we cannot have a recorded vote. Those against the amendment? Thank you very much. The amendment is lost. We return to the substantive debate with Councillor Coburn.
Sorry, but do we have abstentions? Should abstentions be noted?
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. You're quite correct. Well, are there any abstentions? Yes, there is 1, 2. Okay, 3. Thank you very much. So, Councillor Hyman, thank you very much for pointing that out. Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There can't be a member in this room who is a member of the Joint Planning Committee, or any member who indeed who's been to an inquiry recently, who hasn't lamented the absence of a plan. Time after time we have seen sites that we would not want to see developed being put through because we haven't had a plan in process. We've been to inquiry after inquiry where we've heard the case put by very eloquent QCs that we cannot defend a site because we do not have a local plan in place. It's been heartbreaking, and I really mean that. Some of us have wept at some of the decisions that have been made and we've had to be part of making in recent years. Having said that, I accept there are some issues, and there are issues across the borough on all aspects of infrastructure. I live in Farnham, as those of you know me know. I live in the south of Farnham, very nice area. About a mile, I suppose, from the Shepherd and Flock. I've never actually measured it, maybe slightly more. But I have to allow the same amount of time to get from my house in the Bourne to the Shepherd and Flock roundabout, a distance of just over a mile, say, and then it takes me the same amount of time to get to Guildford, which is 10 miles away. The roads in Farnham are as chocker as they are anywhere else in this borough. And we are going to have problems wherever we put housing. And we are going to have to see what we can do to mitigate the effects of that traffic. But we have to accept that there are going to be some difficulties in delivering any local plan. It has to be better, though, than this system at the moment of a developer-led planning system which is not serving any of our residents at all. I fully support this plan. I have odd reservations. I'm actually with Councillor Ramsdale on that inclusion of the Greenbelt bit in part 2, if we can have a look at that. I think we do, all of us share the aim of keeping that separation between Frensham and Rowledge and that area. So I think, you know, there are areas that we will all fight. But it cannot be reasonable to vote against a plan which puts development back in our hands. Whatever the plan is, and yes, there's maybe some work to be done on it, but if we have an up-to-date local plan, then we are back to being where we should be, which is plan-led and not developer-led. For too long now, we've been wringing our hands at some of these awful decisions. We've had to go along with outline decisions, and then we've got absolutely appalling designs that we are supposed to support on behalf of our residents. It's been a very, very difficult few years, and I, for one, don't want to prolong this any longer. I really don't. I want this plan up and running. I want it to be supported, but above all, I want us to be back in charge of our borough, because, as I've said over and over again, it's been far too long. You have my full support, leader, on this. I will do whatever I can in the meantime to improve any aspects of it. Like many people around here, you know, you have my as much time as I can offer, I will offer to get this plan absolutely to perfection. But please, please, please don't delay this plan tonight. Give us back control. Get some decent development in this borough. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn. Councillor Ward is next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I find myself in large agreement with a number of comments that have been made before me. I do, however, have one problem with the basis of this plan, which I have aired consistently since the last plan, shall we say, was forced to be withdrawn on housing numbers. The area of the Shmar I just find extremely difficult to come to terms with. What Farnham has to do with Woking in housing totally defeats me. I've asked many people and no one has managed to give me a reasonable explanation of why Aldershot and Borden and Farnborough have no bearing on what is happening in Waverley, but Woking does. Even in our lovely map on page 13, we have all the aforementioned towns, of course, with the exception of Woking, because it's not on the map. So I have a huge difficulty with the whole basis of this plan. I totally share Councillor Coburn's concern that we really do need a plan. So I have a deep quandary here, because we are definitely being taken to the cleaners by developers across the borough. Infrastructure is a huge problem for us all. And in the past, we seem to have almost had a competition between the A325 and the A281 as to which is the busiest road and which is causing the most difficulty. I would hope that as a council and as councillors, we can perhaps put the competition to one side and get together and realise that the jam outside Wonersh is quite equal to the jam in Recklesham. We have a joint problem on roads, and we shouldn't be competing with each other as to who has the worst road. We should be getting together with each other and seeing what can be done to solve it in a joint and constructive manner. The last two things which I really need to mention since I'm on my feet are air quality in the centre of Farnham. It's been an air quality study area for a long, long time, but nothing ever seems to happen. And I read things in the plan that, gosh, things are going to happen, but it doesn't say what and it doesn't say when, and that causes me considerable concern. And of course, the elephant in the room, SANGs. Natural England have given their support to our mitigation strategy, so I think we're probably stuck with it. But we all know SANGs doesn't work. Dogs numbers on a paucity of counts, I have to admit, because we don't have any decent evidence. Either way, we certainly have none that SANGs works, but there are now appear to be more dogs in the SPA than there were before Farnham Park miraculously became a suitable place for them to take their dogs. So those are my concerns. My biggest concern is I don't believe the housing evidence is on a reasonable and correct area. And I think that's it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Councillor Denis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually agree with so many comments have been made, so I'll try and keep my comments to comments I've made in other meetings to summarise. I've consistently said that the consultation was flawed, going back to 2014. I think it was 4% respondents across Waverley, and 80% of those 4% actually said that that was their preferred location. Well, I've done a bit of research and asked where those respondents came from, and there's not too many dots in the local area who supported that scenario. Apologies for my colleagues, as I've raised this earlier in executive, but my concerns have always been about the infrastructure, sustainability, the transport. You know, we all have these concerns. We have flooding in the local area. And I do agree with Councillor Mulliner about the numbers. I do hope this doesn't come back to bite us, that we have got the numbers wrong and then we've got to do the work and change that. To me, it's not about we don't want housing locally. You know, Alfold, who I represent, and the area I represent, Dunsfold Park is in our parish. So I represent those people. It's not about us saying we don't want housing. We've always said we want housing that has the infrastructure to support it, that is sustainable, is in the right location. And I clearly don't think on the eastern side it's the best location. I look to why I was elected, and I was elected to represent the people of our local area. And in all the time last 18 months, I have not had the support from the local people to say that they support this. And I wouldn't be doing them justice if I then supported it. I won't vote against it. I will abstain tonight, but I certainly can't support it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Denis. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Councillor Denis has more or less said exactly what I was going to say. When this council voted to put part 1 out of the local plan out to public consultation in July, I declined to support the recommendation. I continue to reluctantly accept in general the location and amount of development proposed, but nothing's changed to alter my view that the proposed mitigations for traffic in the east of the borough are they're still inadequate. And some specific reasons. Proposals to introduce traffic signals in the centre of Bramley as they stand will result in the loss of the lay-by outside Holy Trinity Church, which is used by hearses, wedding cars and for delivery of the infirm and aged to the church. So that's in direct conflict with policy TSC2 in the new local plan. I welcome the long overdue proposals for a traffic management scheme to curtail the use of minor roads in Hascombe and Busbridge by HGVs, but this will result in an increase in the number of HGVs using the 281. HGVs tend to be treated numerically in assessments on traffic on the 281 as if they were the same as ordinary vehicles, with no specific assessment of their safety, pollution and wear and tear on the road impacts. So I don't find that adequate. And then ambulance response times, which are inadequate in many parts of the borough, are not given serious consideration in this plan. So until the infrastructure delivery plan sets out to provide truly sustainable transport solutions by addressing the causes of these problems, rather than sticking elastoplasts over the symptoms, I regret I can't support the submission of the plan, and like colleagues, I will be abstaining this evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Seaborn. Councillor Forżewski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nobody loathes more than me what's happened in Cranley and what's happening in the east of our borough. And I loathe it with a passion, and I've stood in this chamber for years and I've made that clear. For years, only few of us in this chamber have spoke out and warned what would happen. Long before POW or the Civic Society, many said it wouldn't happen, but it has, and it's happening now. I've always spoken passionately about protecting our green fields as we ignore the NPPF to build on brownfield sites first. Cranley has in excess of 765 granted permissions, a further 500 pending, with minimal mitigation, inadequate infrastructure contributions, and no objections from Surrey County Council on all traffic movements going out or onto minor roads leading to the 281. But we are where we are, and we have to move to the next stage. It's crucial. Some excellent work has been done and brave decisions have been made. Tonight we have an opportunity to adopt this local plan, a local plan that offers protection, controlled housing numbers, Dunsfold Park, Trinity College, a brownfield site and major infrastructure contributor, a development that will put millions, not a few £100 here, there and everywhere, but millions into roads and schools and local infrastructure. An estimated figure at this moment in time that's in the region of £8 million as a starting point. A site endorsed by public through the consultation process, demonstrating clearly 82% were in favour of building on Dunsfold Park. Housing numbers. We've heard a lot about housing numbers. It's a myth and it's a red herring if you think the numbers will go down. They're more likely to go up than down. As a borough, we have not met our annual housing target numbers for decades, leaving us with a deficit and a housing void. You can't control the housing numbers if you can't control applications coming forward. GL Hearn has produced a figure of 519. Without a local plan or a 5-year housing supply, you can't control future applications, large or small, that follow. The commissioned Neil MacDonald report is a duplication of taxpayers' money and is written to suit the purchaser. In the GL Hearn response, 2 extremely important points were raised. Until comments were made about that document, I wasn't going to mention these, but I think it's well worth looking at the report at page 11 at point 2.24. It clearly states, referring to the Neil MacDonald, such a mix-match approach would not stand up to scrutiny. And on page 17, 5.1 states, Neil MacDonald does not consider affordable housing, which case law identifies as relevant to drawing conclusion on the objectively assessed need, and which the Cambridge Centre for Housing and Planning Research, which Neil MacDonald is a co-author. Another myth we hear about is Brexit. Brexit is very serious, but it won't happen for years. We need a plan, and we need a plan now. The plan is a document that will be forever evolving and reflects the change of the plan up to 1932, and it will adapt and take consideration into change. Let me skip to what is really, really important.
I'm sorry, Councillor Foraszewski, you've run out of time.
Just 2 things. If we don't have
Councillor Foraszewski, no. Thank you.
I may come back. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't take much time. Councillor Coburn has spoken very eloquently about the absence of a local plan. The absence can lead to consequences we do not wish for. Others have spoken with feeling about local matters. I would like to quote from a Member of Parliament. Council is not a congress of ambassadors from different and hostile interests, which interests each must maintain as an agent and advocate against other agents and advocates. But Council is a deliberative assembly of one nation with one interest, that of the whole, where not local purposes, not local prejudices ought to guide, but the general good, resulting from the general reason of the whole. I commend the local plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Band.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, firstly, I'd like to follow up and endorse the work which our officers and our executive have done in bringing the plan to this current stage. I think a huge amount of work has had to be done and has been done. It doesn't still leave us without problems. I think we have on the one side the absolute importance of getting a local plan on the table and having some protection against developers, has been rightly pointed out in this council chamber, but also to make our plan credible, planning to build the number of houses which are in the plan, which I reluctantly accept in the eastern area in Dunsfold and Cranley. Infrastructure is absolutely vital, and I don't think we're there yet, and I think the recommendation number 2 acknowledges we're not there yet. But one of the great problems, I think, so far on infrastructure has been the disconnect with the local communities. We've been relying on our statutory consultees for their opinions, and their opinions seem to count. What we have seen so often in planning applications, time after time, a significant difference between local views on what infrastructure is necessary and what actually our statutory consultees actually advise, and that goes through. Now, I would urge, if I'm going to support this plan, I would urge our planning officers and our portfolio holder in this extra work which is now planned to update and further refine the infrastructure, to actually consult with our local members as to try and bring them on board. We have noticed in JPC, wherever a developer actually works closely with the local community, things change and broad agreement can be reached fairly quickly. I think this is one area which we ought to use that model, if we can, in actually bringing local people on board through their local councillors. Now, I'm not suggesting we add another review process to the process. That the time doesn't permit that. But I do think it would be appropriate, if it is possible, for when further developments take place, particularly with respect to timing and funding. As Councillor Goodridge has pointed out, there's some new worthwhile things in the latest IDP schedule, but the timing of them tends to be right at the back end of the programme, 2032, end of the plan. Yeah, many areas, the funding isn't firmly identified and committed. These are big issues, because without that strategic infrastructure, very often funded from outside the actual developments themselves, in the eyes of the local community, Dunsfold and the rest of the major plans in Cranley, which are in the plan, frankly aren't credible. But so, reluctantly, I think the balance for me is just to keep the plan going forward. But I do urge the leader and the officers to consider talking to the local community when their plans get further refined. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Band. Councillor Tom Martin.
Thank you. I think it's worth noting just how long it has taken to get to this point of local plan resubmission. And I would like to echo the comments made by the leader and indeed other members regarding the hard work our officers have put in to get us to where we are today. I know that there are some who are unhappy about it, but we do need to have a local plan in place. And I would rather this was influenced by local people and submitted by the local council rather than perhaps being imposed on us by central government or the planning inspectorate. There was considerable concern when the last local plan was withdrawn, when we would be left with little planning protection for our borough. I believe that it is imperative that we have a plan that this council can work to, that enables us to build housing to support those who wish to live here and indeed often have a local connection. So often I've encountered residents who, on the doorstep, say how difficult it is for children and grandchildren to live in the local area. If we don't continue to build housing of all sizes and types, our children and their children will continue to be priced out and forced out of this local area. Although still very young, I would dearly love for my children to live as close to me as I live to my parents and in-laws, should of course they wish it. I appreciate the views of some about a lack of infrastructure, but I fear that this could be encountered across the whole borough, as Councillor Coburn has so eloquently put earlier. I do not believe an inspector nor central government would accept that our level of infrastructure, however poorly perceived it may be, is sufficient to reject the local plan in front of us. The plan, particularly Part 2, will do far more to address the infrastructure, but remember, we cannot have Part 2 without Part 1. Much has been said about the schma, and whether the housing numbers should be based on data for population projections from 2012, 2014 or later. If we keep looking at a constantly moving figure, we will never submit a plan. The data we have used is the data available at the time of submission for consultation, and revisiting that figure now would mean going back to consultation, and we will then be in a vicious circle, never actually getting to the point of examination. Ultimately, what we have before us is a local plan that is based on sound evidence, and I am comfortable with that, with what is put before us. The end decision will ultimately be made by a planning inspector in a public examination, and I believe that this council does need to move forward to this stage, thus preventing us from being in ever-decreasing circles of bureaucracy and evidence gathering. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards is next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would be repeating what my colleague has just said, so I don't need to speak on the subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be supporting the recommendations this evening for very much the reasons stated very eloquently by many other councillors. It's obviously very important that we have a local plan in place after 2 previous abortive attempts, for the reasons already stated. My concern about the plan is not actually that we need a plan or that it should be approved. It's much more to do with the implementation of the plan. And the implementation of the plan is not actually, it is in our control in many respects, but in terms of housing numbers, it's not in our control. We as a borough don't build houses apart from a very small number of social houses. The houses are built by developers. And I've seen these developers in action, like Councillor Coburn, at many appeals, at public examinations, and at the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan examination. And these developers seem to have turned themselves very largely into legal firms. They seem to spend most of their time attacking councils for their failures, saying that the council's fault that houses are being built. And as I say, we don't actually build the houses. And what's happening in Waverley is the number has been more or less doubled from the traditional level in Waverley, about 230 to 250 a year, to 512. Now that may well represent the need, and it probably does represent the need. But will it actually happen? It will only happen actually if the developers build them. And with the present planning system, it's not actually in their interest to build them. It's the opposite, in fact. If they can actually create the situation where Waverley doesn't have a five-year housing supply, it puts additional pressure on Waverley to give more planning permissions. The borough's doing that already. We've already upped the planning permissions very substantially, but they're not actually being built. The local plan started in 2013, and the actual numbers being built have carried on very much at the same level as before. So that's my concern about it, and this is not a criticism of Waverley. Waverley is doing their best with the local plan. The officers have done a great deal of work. The executive and all the councillors who have been part of the SIG have done a great deal of work. The problem actually lies in the system created by the government. Now I actually arranged to see Mr Hunt and my local MP on Friday to tell him what I think is wrong with all of this. And I know that the portfolio holder is going to see the housing minister. So I hope we can do something about this, because it's a national problem. It's not just a problem in Waverley. So that's my concern. It's not so much that we must have a plan, the number may well be right, but there's every chance it won't actually happen. And if it doesn't happen, the consequences will come back in Waverley, not on the developers who are not building the houses. So thank you, Mr Mayor. That's my comments.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Councillor MacLeod is Councillor Byrne.
I was having difficulty raising the strength to raise my hand. What we're discussing tonight, we talk about a local plan. It's a developer's plan. It's about developing houses. It's about providing all of the things that we need for those developments. Unfortunately, we're not in control of any of those things other than the submission and the acceptance of planning applications. Our roads, our water, all of our infrastructure systems are outside our control, and we don't have a controlling interest in any way whatsoever. We have to ask the providers, the county council, etc., what we ought to do. or what we're able to do. So we're not able to persuade them, it seems, to do any of the things that we would wish to happen to improve the infrastructure, to provide the facilities that our new developments and our existing, long-term existing residents think they ought to have. And I'm talking now in the Cranley area and Orfold area, the problems of sewage and water. Massive problems which are nowhere near. We've had a local plan since 2002. It went out of date. In that period from 2002, we didn't achieve any of these things with regard to infrastructure. So why should we rely upon the infrastructure providers to actually do it for us now? I came here tonight thinking, well, I would abstain. I don't think I'll abstain. I think I shall vote for it, because we must vote for what we control, but where we get the strength from to actually provide, or sorry, persuade the infrastructure providers and others to, and the government to allow us to do the things that we need to do in terms of obtaining funds, amalgamating funds, etc., because we hear all the time we can't lump a series of too many developers together to provide a particular infrastructure requirement. And that clearly cannot be right. It's just a mishmash of little bits and pieces done to try to put patches on the problems. We should have a much better way of solving those problems. So I'm concerned. I still think it's a developer's plan. It's not a local plan. Thank you.
Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be fairly brief because I agree with much that has been said already this evening, but I want to go back on the transport again and the infrastructure part, because it concerns me some of the things that are in here in our name, because in the Annex 1 with all the responses, and it says the council's response, and of course the council is the members. For example, it says one of the consultation remarks was insufficient existing car parking to accommodate additional cars. The response by this council, it sounds as if it comes out of the Kremlin. Disagree. Public car parking provision is an important factor in controlling the level of car use. In other words, we don't like motorists, keep off the road, is what the response is from this council. Hardly really shows us in a very good light. It then goes on to say, alongside other sustainable transport measures, which the report again talks about. But the truth of the matter is that what is in here is not true. It talks about increasing public transport and our residents being walking and cycling. This isn't an outer London borough, this is a rural district with hills and narrow roads. That is not going to happen. It's utter nonsense. And as for increasing public transport, 2 months ago, the public bus system in this borough and the neighbouring one was cut substantially. If you go into the foyer of this council, there are new timetables. The first 2 pages list the transport that has been cut. In my own town, the service has been cut by 20%. So put in the document and submit it to the inspector knowingly that that is untrue, that it is going to be improved. The evidence is in the foyer of this building. It is not. It is quite the reverse. Whilst I agree the need for a local plan, I cannot put my name to statements which I know not to be true, and I will therefore abstain.
Thank you, Councillor Knowles. The other Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you put a bunch of 25 to 30-year-olds into a room and ask them what the big issue for them is, they will say housing. They want a house of their own. And we are not able to deliver the housing numbers that are needed. And this plan does go a long way to getting that right. And I will be supporting this plan tonight. Of course, it's been put together with all of the difficulties that you have in putting a plan like this together. There are things that you don't like about it. You don't like the process. You don't like how it's done. But you have to work within the confines of what you've got and what is required by government. And hence you get a plan like we have now to go forward with. The other big issue which many have raised is, of course, transport infrastructure. And that as an issue has been with us for for 50 or 60 years. Surrey is a successful economy with an economy of 36, 37 billion pounds a year. Surrey as a whole puts more into the exchequer in the way of income tax than any other part of the country other than London. One borough in Surrey puts in more income tax to the exchequer than the whole of Greater Glasgow. Our council tax rates used to be the lowest in the country. They're now the highest in the country. So that we put in a great deal more into the exchequer than we get back. The difficulty, of course, is 50 years of neglect of infrastructure, be it road or rail. If we fix the Shepherd and Flock roundabout that Councillor Coburn mentioned, of course, then the traffic rushes down to the A3, and unless that's fixed, you get an even bigger problem there. So you fix that and you rush on to the M25 junction, huge problem there. Fix that and then you get another problem just beyond at Cobham. Fix that and you go on and you get a huge problem at Hook, and so forth. It's all interrelated. There are so many projects that really need to be fixed. My favoured solution for the A281 is a bypass around Bramley and Blackheath and up through Merrow to the A3. Wouldn't that be brilliant? But that's going to cost hundreds of millions of pounds if it were possible. One roundabout can cost one roundabout improvement can cost 5 or 6 million. So the numbers are much bigger than we have here. The real issue is we need to get a better deal for Surrey and this area and have sort of infrastructure funding from government, which is more in relation to the money that we put in. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Right, last call. Fine. Leader.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Where do I start? Well, hopefully I've managed to encapsulate all the questions and points raised. So I'll sort of start to address some of those, if I may, as I summarise. I think one of the major areas that I do want to just clarify and go back to, if I may, are the concerns that are being raised about the Neil MacDonald report and the concerns around the housing needs assessment. And if I may just quote from the MPPG on housing needs assessment, it states, wherever possible, local needs assessments should be informed by the latest available information. The National Planning Policy Framework is clear that local plans should be kept up to date. A meaningful change in the housing situation should be considered in this context. But this does not automatically mean that housing assessments are rendered outdated every time new projections are issued. To that point, we have employed specialist technical consultants used by a number of authorities up and down this country to do that work for us. And we cannot continually challenge. It would not be right. We've challenged, we've looked for additional evidence, we had that work, and we've had that work reviewed already as part of this process coming before you this evening. Several months ago that was reviewed. And for us to continually review and not believe in what's before you tonight is not helpful. We need to move this plan forward, as Councillor Forozeski said, and a number of other councillors have said. We're very much in the hands of developers. The borough at the moment, unfortunately, is very much developer-led, and we need to lead. We as a council, you as councillors, need to lead. You and the residents have fed into this particular local plan. As I say, not everyone likes it, not everyone's happy with all the conclusions in it, but we need to take control. In terms of the comments made by Councillor Ramsdale and Councillor Coburn about the Greenbelt in South Farnham, there will be a Greenbelt review coming in as part of the local plan part 2, and there is no reason why that can't be included in that review. I'm not going to stand here and make promises I can't keep, so I honestly don't know the outcome of that review, but there is no reason why that particular area can't be included. I think it's really important to understand that one of the other key areas is infrastructure delivery. We've said that that's a document that's going to continue to evolve. We will be continuing to update. We have got a number of different dates in there, and there are a number of dates with quite a way ahead of us. But let's remember, we're looking at a plan that goes up to 2032. So we're not going to, unfortunately, be able to deliver everything straight away. In terms of some of the other concerns, certainly in the eastern part of the borough, we've got and do recognise the concerns from both members and the public, certainly around the water quality within the Cranley and eastern part of the borough. And we continue with our consultants, AMEC, to work very closely on that with the Environment Agency. A specialist study has been commissioned, and that's due into us across the next week. And the results of that will be submitted with the local plan. So we are aware of that, and any learnings coming from that, which we do expect there will be, can then be included as well. I think one of the other issues that has been raised by a number of emails I've had today has come up about affordable housing. And just to be clear, we've got a policy that's setting out 30% in terms of affordable housing. We feel, having debated that long and hard as members and at the special interest group, that manages for us to strike the right balance between housing need and viability, because ultimately we want the infrastructure and we want to ensure that we create really sustainable communities. Now, to the point on Sang, I'm afraid all I can say in answer to that, Councillor Hyman, is again that Natural England have agreed, so we do have to look to their comments on that. The SHMA, well, that to your point, Councillor Ward, is something that members over the years I know have frequently raised. Why is there such a broad range? Why do we include Guildford and Woking? The fact is that the SHMA is Guildford-centric, and there are very strong relationships between Guildford, both between Waverley and Guildford and Woking. So that's the reason for that. We do continue to work to develop this plan. We want a successful plan. We'll continue to review the performance of developers and do what we can to lobby to make sure that they do deliver the housing. And that's as much as we can do, but that is firmly on our radar. We've got a lot more happening in terms of neighbourhood plans coming forward. So again, that will help to give additional control once we've got our local plan in place to the towns and the villages. And we've got to make sure we keep up that momentum and continue to work with our towns and parishes on those very key areas. Colleagues, in conclusion, I'd like to take this opportunity not just to thank the officers, but to thank members of the planning SIG who've worked with me over the last few months and will continue to do so. Councillor Adams, in his absence tonight, who's put a huge amount of work into this, and everyone else who, as I say, has been involved. This is our best chance to really grasp the nettle and to become the leader in this borough with this plan, and not be in the hands of the developers and continue to be developer-led. So on that note, I would like to submit this to Council and submit the 2 recommendations. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Now, if you look at your minutes under 95.4, you will see that it was suggested that we would have a recorded vote this evening. If we are to have a recorded vote, I need somebody to propose that and 5 people to second it, please. Oh, we've got lots of people there. Yes, but Councillor Gray. Thank you very much. We have 2 recommendations. Unless I hear objections, I propose to take both of them together. Is that acceptable? Thank you. Okay, I'll pass over to Mr. Taylor, who will go through the roll. If you can answer aye or nay or abstain. Thank you.
Members, when I call out your name, please say whether you wish to vote for, vote against or abstain. Thank you. Mike Band.
For.
Andrew Bolton.
For.
Maurice Byam. For. Carol Coburn. For. Kevin Denis.
Abstain.
Jim Edwards.
For.
Patricia Ellis.
For.
David Else.
For.
Jenny Else. For. Mary Forozewski. For. John Fraser.
For.
Michael Goodridge.
For.
Tony Gordon-Smith.
For.
John Gray.
Abstain.
Was that abstain?
Abstain.
Yep. Thank you. Jed Hall.
For.
Jill Hargreaves.
For.
Val Henry. Christian Hesser.
For.
Mike Hodge.
For.
Nicholas Holder.
For.
David Hunter.
For.
Jerry Hyman.
Against.
Simon Inchbold.
For.
Peter Isherwood.
For.
Anna James. Carol King. Robert Knowles.
Abstain.
Denise Legal. Dennis Lee.
For.
Andy MacLeod.
For.
Peter Martin.
For.
Tom Martin.
For.
Stephen Mulliner.
For.
Nabil Nazir.
For.
Libby Piper. Julia Potts. Wyatt Ramsdale.
For.
David Round.
For.
Richard Seaborn.
Abstain.
Jeanette Stennett. Stuart Stennett. Mr Mayor.
For.
Ross Welland. Liz Wheatley. John Ward.
For.
Nick Williams. John Williamson. One against. 40, 1, so that's 40 votes for, 1 against and 5 abstentions.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Those recommendations are passed. That brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you all very much.
Please rise whilst the Mayor leaves the chamber.